So the headline is Stonehenge's age called into question after revelation about ancient burial site. And right there in that one sentence, there's a heck of a lot to unpack, and we're going to try to do just that in the next few minutes. Hello there, I'm Michael Bott.
I'm Rupert Soskin. Welcome, everybody.
Yeah, so the rule seems to be, if you can use the word Stonehenge in a headline about a new archaeological discovery, then you're absolutely obliged to use it. But how many times can you cry wolf? You couldn't be blamed for looking at our title here and being just a bit wary, perhaps. However, I hope you'll stick around because I'm happy to say that this report really does fulfil on the promise of relating to Stonehenge, and you'll see why in a moment. But before we dive in, please do take a moment to hit the like and subscribe button. You'll be helping us to reach the 100,000 subscriber mark very soon. And to have a think about joining our Patreon community. There's loads more exclusive stuff there for just $5 a month, or making a donation to our Buy Me a Coffee campaign to help us with the GÖBEKLI TEPE to Stonehenge project. Links to more details about both of those things down in the description below. And that's it. We're off to the races.
Well said, that man.
So, another thing linking to Stonehenge. As I said, it absolutely does. But this is about a monument in Dorset called Flagstones.
Yes, down in Dorchester.
What can you tell us about Flagstones, Rupert?
Well, Flagstones, it was found a while ago. It was when they were road building, which is the road that goes through it now? Anyway, it's the main road.
It's the A blah 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 blah.
The A blah blah blah
bypass.
blah blah. It's
Dorchester
the
bypass.
A30.
Yes.
Is it the A30? Anyway, it goes past Dorchester, and that was when it was found. And it was one of those rescue archaeology things that clearly this enormous site uncovered at the time, and the excavations done at the time. Half of it is underneath the bypass. The other half of it is actually on private land, which it'll be very nice if they get to excavate the other half that isn't destroyed by the road, but we'll see.
It's on National Trust property land, actually, I think.
Yes.
Thomas Hardy's house.
Yes, Thomas Hardy's house. It was, yeah.
It's called Max Hall or something like that.
I confess I don't remember.
All right.
But yes, I mean that's it really. So it was the road building that turned this place up, and it and it turned out to be of really significant importance at the time. But what Sue and the team have done is, as with a lot of stuff these days, that you can go back to old excavations, all the samples that are in storage, and reassess, redate all sorts of techniques being applied, and that's why we have this new information now, which is all quite exciting.
Sue being Sue Greeny, the point is this isn't a current excavation. The last time it was actually excavated was 1997, I do believe. That's the
Is it as long ago as that? Crikey.
Yeah, so this is desktop archaeology, folks, and it just goes to show what you can do with it as long as the original archaeology has been done right. And it's all contextualized and stored, and as much information is gathered at the time. Slow going, but there we go. Bayesian modelling, hurrah, says Nelly in the in the chat. And if you're wondering why we're able to talk to people in the chat, here's because we've got our Patreon members in the chat during this live conversation. As I said earlier, there are some perks to being a Patreon member. This is one of them, being present at our recording sessions.
Yes.
Anyway, so shall I grab the article that we've chosen to use as a backbone for this conversation, Rupert, and do that? This article from The Independent by Rod Mitchin, as I said, Stonehenge's age called into question after revelation about ancient burial sites. Subtitle: Findings could suggest that our current dating of Stonehenge might need revision. Tantalising stuff. A Dorset burial site has been revealed as Britain's oldest known circular enclosure, pushing back previous estimates by 200 years. Do interrupt me if you want to say something, Rupert.
Yeah,
the
not yet.
Flagstone, the Flagstones monument near Dorchester has been redated to approximately 3,200 BC, following radiocarbon analysis of human remains, red deer antlers, and charcoal found at the site. This new timeline, established by researchers at the University of Exeter and Historic England, suggests flagstones may be a precursor to later monuments like Stonehenge. It could also suggest that our current dating of Stonehenge might need revision, a researcher says. The site's unique structure, a perfectly circular ditched enclosure containing both burials and cremations, represents a fascinating blend of practices from different prehistoric periods. In some respects, it looks like monuments that come earlier, which we call causewayed enclosures, and in others, it looks a bit like things that come later that we call henges, Dr. Susan Greeney from the University of Exeter said. But we didn't know where it sat between these types of monuments, and the revised chronology places it at an earlier period than we expected. Now, we were talking earlier, Rupert, and I think that's the thing that leapt out from the paper for both of us, is that it really helps envision a kind of chronology from back end of the early Neolithic through the middle Neolithic and into the late Neolithic, which is a really, because it's always felt a bit piece to me that things weren't joining up. And there's a hope in this, if this, the implications from this research is correct, that we can just see a bit of a continuum through what was going on in the
Well, it's interesting. I mean,
fourth millennium.
The intriguing thing here is the associated burials. You'd be forgiven for thinking that they're, well, in some ways they are calling it a burial site, but the thing is that the numbers of burials that have been found doesn't really make this a burial site. It just means it's a site where they found burials.
Yeah, that's what I meant about unpacking that headline. Stonehenge's age, all very well, but it's not an ancient burial site per se. That's misleading.
And it's intriguing that when you think how even in more recent history, and you look at how the use of sites changes over relatively short periods of time, that it can be a generational thing, that suddenly a place is completely different. And to give a really appalling example, there was a wonderful garden centre near where I lived in London that became a Sainsbury's, and I think you can make that same analogy, that when you see the usage of some of these prehistoric sites changing, that the burials seem to creep in here and they're spread out over quite a long period of time, that, we don't know what was going on. I really like to think that with this, the more modern practice now, because of the modern technologies or the new technologies that are coming out, that we're going to be able to look at sites all the way over the country and really piece together a lot of nefarious detail, stuff that was just not known before, and it might just progressively create a clearer and clearer picture. The dating is still, it's the building of this site, the construction of this site, and the dating of the site. When you look at the actual, it's Bayesian modelling, but you look at the actual dating that you get, and there is major overlap in the dating that you get. Now, you can interpret that in two ways. You can look at the dating, the ranges of the dates that you get with carbon dating, to say that this happened first and this happened afterwards. But with the variation in the overlaps, you could say, well, no, it all happened at the same time. The carbon dating isn't that specific that you can pin it down to that extent. So it's there's still so many questions. I love this. It's raised so many more questions, which is always a good thing.
As we just go through the rest of this article, I think it'll trigger a few more thoughts as well along those lines. As an artist's impression from the paper itself, reconstruction of flagstones. I don't know if that tells much, but it's good to have. Flagstones was discovered in the 1980s during construction of the Dorchester bypass, as we mentioned. Excavations showed it was formed of a 100-metre diameter circular ditch made of intersecting pits, probably an earthwork bank. Today, half of the site lies beneath the bypass, with the remainder beneath Max Gate, Thomas Hardy's former home, now bequeathed to the National Trust. Flagstones is a scheduled monument with finds and excavation archives preserved at Dorset Museum. At least 4 burials were found to have been placed in the enclosure pits, a cremated adult and 3 children who had not been cremated, and there were 3 partial cremations of adults elsewhere. And I just want to, reiterate the point that Rupert's just made. That this site, extends over, well, it's over 1,000 years, isn't it? The use, he says, rabbit ears.
Yes.
The use of the site extends over 1,000 years, and you've only got 4 burials, and you're calling it a burial site.
Yeah. I think it's 7 burials in total they found, didn't they?
Even so, it's still...
it doesn't make it a burial site, no, absolutely
it doesn't
not,
make it... What it does make it, I do not know. I mean, obviously, it speaks to a different mindset about what you do with your dead and how you honour them, and what level of... You ask the question, what level in society could these people have been to have been honoured in such a way, or to have given meaning to their lives by being placed, whatever that meaning that might have been, by being placed in what is in a very important place. But you've got to think about a different mindset as to burial, because this is not like a graveyard at all.
No, in fact, one of the things that's most striking about this is how empty it is.
Yeah. And that's the problem, isn't it? What the heck is it?
Really, what is it?
Yeah. So forgive me sort of reiterating that point, but so the similarity of the site to the first phase of Stonehenge, which has been dated to about 2900 BC, led to the assumption that flagstones must be of a similar date. But the new findings suggest that early Neolithic activity, including the digging of the pits, took place in about 3650 BC. After a gap of many centuries, the circular ditched enclosure was created in about 3200 BC, with burials placed in it immediately afterwards. Very interesting, that. So... They're not going to give a lot of detail about the earlier pits from 3650. It kind of suggests, and I wonder if they had enough available archaeology to discern this or not, but there was no claim of the earlier pits being a causewayed enclosure, which would kind of make sense, seeing as up to and including about 3200 BC, they are the ubiquitous types of monument rabbit ears, again, throughout the British Isles and Ireland. Causeway. Go on, Rupert. Sorry.
No, it was sorry. It was actually one of the first notes reading the paper. It was one of the first notes that I wrote to myself, was how much of the site, the entire site, was actually excavated, because obviously standard archaeological practice, that you're digging trenches and you're discerning, you have implications and inferences from the excavations that are being done, and if you look at the illustrations actually in the paper itself, where it's that you have an arc of ditches, and you can see where Sue has actually differentiated between the light colours are where they actually excavated, the dark colours are where the inference showed that's where this line goes. This was excavated, this wasn't. This was excavated, this wasn't. And if you apply that to the site as a whole, then it does, it raises that question of, is there anything significant there that has been missed? Quite possibly, quite probably. But equally, you do have to say that it is still really strange that it's so empty, because if this was, say, a settlement, because it's big enough to be a small settlement, that if it was a settlement, then you would be turning up, whether it's flints or bits of pottery, stuff like that, but there's nothing like that at all. So it's just weird, really.
So Nellie says, so this would be the oldest circle of its kind in the UK, according to the new dating, or just the oldest ditch? My head is turning. Yeah.
Yeah, well, that's...
I think hopefully, if we do a job properly, it will be made a bit clearer. Because I think, our heads are turning a bit at this and getting a bit confused. But if I can help in that matter... I mean, Nelly, you probably know this, but the thing about the causewayed enclosures being all over the place and well, I mean, I can illustrate. I have here both volumes of Gathering Time. These are big, heavy books.
I have to say, Michael and I both have these books, and the sight of it doesn't give you any real impression as to how heavy they are and how dense that paper is, because the pages are actually quite thin and they're heavy, and the data in them is utterly mind-boggling. And that these two books are entirely about the causewayed enclosures of Britain and Ireland. But the dates match up. So these are the things you've got before this circular or this type of circular enclosure. I think that's the point that Sue Greene is trying to make. This is a different kind of monument. It comes after causewayed enclosures and before we get to the henges. So carry on. Yeah, and just to come back to Nella's particular question there of are we talking about the oldest ditches or the oldest circle? Both. Because clearly the digging of the ditches started a long time before it was a circle. And so I think it's so important to reiterate here that this dating pushes it back quite a long way. But you've got to remember that they haven't dated everything in the country anyway. It's always going to be the oldest as far as we know. And that is an important thing, because there are so many sites, up and down the length and breadth of Britain, that we know the sites were there and they are dated on the basis of the typology. Looks like this, so we'll say it's roughly that age. They have not been actually officially dated. So that remains to be seen. Also,
causewayed enclosures, while circular in form, they were never perfect circles. They're more described as concentric circles of broken up pits. This seems to be a little bit more continuous. This circle, Flagstones does. So I hope we didn't get too bogged down in it, but I hope we're trying to sort of build a little bit of a chronology that's here. A later burial of a young adult male under a large sarsen stone at the centre of the enclosure took place about 1,000 years or so after its initial use. The chronology of Flagstones is essential for understanding the changing sequence of ceremonial and funeral monuments in Britain, Dr. Greene said. This is where we would part company a little bit, because as so often is the case, Sue Greene is operating from the paradigm of it's ritual.
Yes.
And to call something a funeral monument on the basis of, as you said, 7 sets of remains over, albeit that there were some put in at the earlier phase,
Yes.
Even so, that's a very light
Do you
number.
know? Well, I think one of the real big question marks there is so the later burial that came 1,000 years later, that's in the middle.
Yeah.
If it was the other way round, then you'd say, this hugely important burial right in the middle of this big circle, that you'd say, okay, burial site maybe, but because it's 1,000 years later, even weirder that they put it in the middle.
Yeah.
Really?
It's like it was, its use changed. Like, that's another conversation.
Although it has to be said that, you look at the times that we have, we've looked at sites where, whether it's somebody was buried in their house or somebody was buried in the middle of their farm, that it could be someone took ownership of the land.
That's what I meant by another conversation.
Well, hey, I'm just throw the grenade in there.
But anyway, here we're getting to the nub of the thing and the relationship to Stonehenge. The sister monument to Flagstones is Stonehenge, whose first phase is almost identical, but dates to around 2900 BC. Could Stonehenge have been a copy of Flagstones, or do these findings suggest our current dating of Stonehenge might need revision? I think, that's a good point to just try and bring that together and make some kind of clarity. Of course, when we're talking about Stonehenge, the image that floods into people's minds is upright sarsen stones and the trilithons, etc., and the blue stones. But this phase of Stonehenge that's been married to flagstones is, of course, the earliest stage where you've got a circular ditch and bank and some other detail, and some, cremations and burials in the ditch around. And certainly, that early phase of Stonehenge was used as a cemetery. There are a large number of burials associated.
A lot more burials at Stonehenge than at Flagstones.
A lot more,
that's for sure.
Yeah. But nevertheless, the point is that the form of the monument, as Sue Greene says, is very, very close indeed to that at Flagstones. And the dating thing becomes very interesting because go back to what we said earlier about there being an earlier ring of pits at Flagstones. And now the dating for the ditches at Stonehenge have been generally set at 2900 BC. But now there's an implication that there's an earlier date could be reckoned with because the burial of a cattle cattle skull in the ditch at Stonehenge was dated to 200 years earlier. And the story that has been created behind that is that the people who built Stonehenge had this as this skull as an ancestral hand-me-down that they honoured with placement in the ditch at the time of burial. Now it's being suggested that the first stage of Stonehenge may have been much earlier, and that skull belongs with that earlier phase and has just been included, as the earth is turned over, got included in this later ditch. So that's the connection that's now being made, and the possible overlap, which is nice. All we need now is similar sort of intermediary circular ditch and banks, perfectly circular ditch and bank, in other places in the country.
Yeah.
Let's not forget. Sorry, Rupert.
No,
Obviously, a huge importance got attached to the Stonehenge environs, to the Stonehenge location. Similarly, huge importance is attached to the Dorchester, the Dorchester location, but expressed in different ways. It's only 500 yards. It's only 500 yards from the giant henge of Mount Pleasant, which is a massive henge. And in Dorchester itself, you've got Mornbury rings, and you've got the massive timber posts that you can see if you go in the car park in Waitrose in Dorchester. So the activity around here is really, really intense in the same kind of way that it was intense around Stonehenge. But eventually we get sarsen stones instead of the other stuff at Stonehenge.
It's also worth pointing out here as well that the style of structure that so talking about it being like Stonehenge, the fact that the bank is on the inside of the ditch, that it's completely the other way around from henges.
Yes.
And that's the distinctive feature really about how it comes so much earlier than henges. Because it's not often you see structures with the ditch on the inside. Sorry, the bank on the inside. I'm talking about this now. Yeah.
The other thing that is pointed out in the paper itself, and doesn't come up in the articles that I've seen, is that flagstones in this form being contemporary with a lot of activity elsewhere, all over Britain, right up to Orkney, and indeed the Boyne Valley. The valley. This brings in this period, 3,200 to 3,000 BC, right into focus, because Newgrange is, 3,200 BC. And at the same time, during this period, we've got grooved ware coming down from Orkney. So we're wondering, what sort of influence was coming down from Orkney at this time. So, it's a fascinating thing. And for me, this paper sort of joined up a few dots, and I find it very exciting in that way.
Yeah. It also it highlights really the potentials, which, we've said it 100 times. One of the problems with archaeology, you're dealing with what's left. And if you have got evidence for, there has been centuries of activity, and you're left with this site, this is what you've got, that how long people were doing what they were doing at the sites that are no longer there to be explored in the landscape. I mean, Mount Pleasant, it's absolutely enormous, but it's just ploughed out, it's under farmland. And it's that really, that if so much activity was going on throughout Britain, and as you said, stuff coming down from Orkney, that just how much was coming into whichever the sites, so whether it's Flagstones or any of the sites further into Wiltshire and indeed up into Yorkshire, that how much activity was going on, that actually chronologically it was seamless, that it didn't stop at all. It's just that the bigger sites just completely swamped out anything that was there before. So much that is probably unanswerable, but
Yeah. But like I say, it really helps join the dots. I find that it's a pity that we can't include this in the thing about Stonehenge that we're completing at the moment. That's the trouble. Once you put your mark in the sand, somebody comes along and says, "Oh, we've updated that."
Yes.
Oh, Lord.
Thank you so much.
Stop the press. Anyway, I can't think of anything really more to say about it. I hope we've fulfilled the promise of proving to you that this headline genuinely does.
Already.
That it does genuinely relate to Stonehenge and informs the conversation about Stonehenge at the same time. So I don't think I've got anything more to say on the topic, and
I think it's I just pick up again though the things that get flagged up in papers that just make you reassess certain other things. One of the things that Sue mentions in this paper that I hadn't come across before, there's a place in North Yorkshire, called Duggleby Howe. And Duggleby Howe, it's a barrow basically, but there is a circular enclosure that surrounds Duggleby Howe that is 365. I'm looking at the notes that I wrote down from the paper. 365 metres in diameter. That's bigger than Avebury. And I think, again, something else that's just lost to farming, but something that's even bigger than anything we know in the south. You think, oh my goodness, again, how much more don't we know? So much.
Well, it's another example of us opening trapdoors that is too easy for us to fall down. Because just looking at this, I didn't mention the name of it. It's called Gathering Time. This tome about
or indeed two tomes.
two tomes about that I didn't realise that very near the place where I grew up in Oxfordshire, a village called Bodicote near Banbury, just along the Wickham Lane that I used to cycle across. Apparently there's a causewayed enclosure somewhere along there. Just goes to show, how, they were all over the place.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
That's it. Please do hit the like and subscribe. Have a look at joining us on Patreon. And also, hopefully, contribute to the GÖBEKLI TEPE to Stonehenge project. Exciting things happening there. More details down below.
Busy. Take care, folks.
Bye for now.
See you.